So in 2019, Warner Brothers announced they were going to be making a new theatrical film version of Stephen King's Salem's Lot. It was shot in 2021 and was supposed to come out in 2022, but got delayed. And got delayed, and delayed again, and delayed again, and eventually it just got taken off of Warner Brothers' release schedule, and I thought for sure this movie was never going to see the light of day. It was going to be the next film Warner Brothers would write off for a tax write-off. Do you remember when all that was going on? When they deleted Batgirl from existence so they could write it off on their taxes? They did the same thing to some Looney Tunes movie with John Cena. And I thought that was going to happen to this movie. I was so sad about that. But they recently announced they were going to be dumping it as a streaming-only movie on HBO Max. I finally got to see it last night. And most people in their reviews are asking, is it worth the wait? Is it worth all of this time that we've been waiting for it? But I'm not asking that because honestly, I just wanted to see this movie. Just seeing it was enough. I previously knew somebody made a new Salem's Lot movie and nobody was letting me see it. But it's here. I got to watch it and that makes me happy. But let's actually talk about it. What's going on, my friends? Welcome again to the Cobwebs channel. My name is Daniel. Thank you so much for dropping by on my review of Salem's Lot. So this film was directed by Gary Dauberman, who previously made Annabelle Comes Home, probably the most fun of the Annabelle movies, a trilogy I'm overall not a big fan of. And it stars Lewis Pullman, Mackenzie Lay, Bill Camp, and Alfre Woodard. It follows the general plot of the 1975 Stephen King novel about author Ben Mears, who returns to his childhood home of Salem's Lot in search of inspiration for a book, but then he discovers the town is now being preyed upon by a bloodthirsty vampire. Real quick, my history with Salem's Lot. I'm actually a big fan of the 1979 TV version directed by Tobe Hooper. I think is an excellent, very creepy, very atmospheric 3-hour vampire epic. And I've not read the book. I've actually started it, never finished it. It's so hard to find time to read when you're doing a YouTube channel talking about movies. I haven't seen the Rob Lowe version, but I was really excited to see an actual theatrical film version of this story. We did sort of get it, just not technically in theaters, here on streaming. But in talking about the movie, I first want to talk about the vibe of this movie, the atmosphere, because that's one of my favorite things about the 1979 Tobe Hooper version, is it has just got such a great, creepy, small town Stephen King atmosphere. I'm a big fan of that whole Stephen King vibe, that small New England town where there's all of this darkness and creepiness under the surface. There's so many Stephen King movies that just nail that vibe, and absolutely the 1979 version does. And this one really does too. I loved the atmosphere of this film. Now, the first one's atmosphere was great, but it was filmed in California, so it doesn't really have an authentic New England kind of vibe. This one was filmed in Massachusetts, and you can tell. I love the look that Salem's Lot has in this movie, these authentic looking 1970s streets, because they did set this in the 1970s. They didn't contemporize it, and I think that's fantastic. The movie has a really good fall vibe to it, so you see leaves blowing in the wind, which is just so great. There's a drive-in theater that's very prominent in this version of the story, and I just love movies that take place at a drive-in. You know what this movie kind of reminded me of in terms of its feel is scary stories to tell in the dark. I feel like if you like scary stories to tell in the dark, you've got a pretty good chance of at least really appreciating the vibe of this movie, this small New England atmosphere. I also like the soundtrack of this movie, particularly the song Sundown by Gordon Lightfoot. Sundown. I really like that song, and it was predominantly featured in the trailer, and when I heard that, I felt like I'd probably be in good hands with this movie, and it's used very well in the actual film as well. But Salem's Lot is more than its look and its feel, it's the people that populate it, right? So how are the characters here? Well, we've got Lewis Pullman as Ben Mears, and yes, he is the son of Bill Pullman, by the way, in case you were curious, and he's good. He's got a good look for the part, but he kind of gets lost in his own movie. This movie feels like much more of an ensemble than the 79 version did, where Ben Mears felt like more the straightforward lead character. For a long time in the movie, he practically disappears. But probably the most endearing thing about him is he has a romance with Susan, and here she is played by Mackenzie Lee, who I'm not really familiar with. I don't think I've seen her in anything else before, but I thought she was really good in this movie. She was incredibly fun and charming. The character has more to do in this version. A little bit more gets in on the actual vampire hunting than Bonnie Bedelia's version did in the 79 version. And she was just funny and very charming and witty. And I thought she was just really fun. And just watching her flirt with Ben Mears made him more likable than I think you would have otherwise. Like, you want him to be okay, you want him to succeed so he can be there for her and make her happy. Not so much because you care about him quite so much. The movie's got a pretty strong supporting cast, like Alfre Woodard is in here as a doctor who has quite a bit to do in the movie. You got William Sadler in here as the town sheriff who, you know, I'm not going to place it totally on William Sadler, but I felt like he was maybe the weakest performance, partially because I think he's given some of the weakest dialogue in the movie. But my favorite supporting performance, and actually just my favorite character here, is Bill Camp as Matthew Burke. And for a while in the movie, I almost thought he was going to be the main character. He kind of took over for a portion of this. He's the local school teacher who becomes convinced of the reality that vampires are invading Salem's Lot first. And I just loved him. I related to him. I was watching this movie with some friends, and one person said he's a Bilbo Baggins type. And you kind of feel that. Like, he wears cozy sweaters. He stays home in his little cabin. He smokes his pipe. He just feels like a hobbit kind of a dude. But when he starts hunting vampires, you feel like he's the Van Helsing of the movie. And I really liked him. And if I gotta say, one of my biggest problems with the movie, I wish there was more of him. Like I said, there's a section towards the middle where I thought he was taken over as the main character, and I was fine with it. I was like, yeah, that's cool. I mean, I know that's not faithful to the novel, but we can forget Ben Mears. We can just follow Bill Camp. That sounds great. That's not really what happens. Ben Mears does take over again, but that's okay. Overall, I'm a fan of the characters in this because of him and because of Susan. They are my favorites. Everyone else is, to one degree or another, okay. I did enjoy the kid in this movie, who is a monster kid like he is in the original. And he's putting together some Universal Monsters models in one scene, and I recognize those. My dad had them when he was a kid, and he saved them, so I had them when I was a kid. Those are authentic Universal Monsters models that you put together and paint. Like, that's legit. You gotta give them credit. But overall, the characters do suffer in this version because of the plot, which is the next section I want to talk about. The story. It's rushed, okay? Like, it is a very thick book. I can tell you that much, even though I haven't finished it. It's a 3-hour miniseries. There's a lot here. They really condense it down, and they really breeze through it. I mean, I was talking about how I really like Ben and Susan's relationship as it was starting to bud. Their flirting was very cute because of her. But, like, they have this flirtation thing, and then it cuts a week ahead, and they're just an item, and then that's kind of it for their relationship. Like, they just skip over the building of it. And there's a lot of good relationship stuff between Ben and Susan in the 79 version. You do really lose a lot of that. But I do think if you've seen the 79 version, which I imagine pretty much everybody has, you can keep this, hold it in your heart, as the version with room to breathe, as like the true Salem's Lot with all of the goodness that you love. And you can watch this new version as a condensed, more action-packed, faster-paced version, and just have it as an alternative. Because I haven't really said yet, but I like this movie. I did enjoy it. I don't think it's great. I don't think it's the best vampire movie of the year. I think Abigail and the Vordelak are both better. I think Nosferatu, coming out later this year, is probably going to be better. But Salem's Lot is a good old-fashioned, bloody, pretty action-packed vampire movie that feels pretty in line with 1980s vampire films. Now, one thing I love about the 79 version, we're talking about the vampires right now, we've got to talk about them, is in that Tobe Hooper version, the vampires are very creepy. And that's my favorite kind of vampires. I like the vampires that slowly come up to your window, come through, and slowly bite you. Like, I like that creeping dread kind of vampire. And the Tobe Hooper version is iconic for the scene when the kid floats up to the window. Incredible. They do a version of that here, and it's pretty good. It's never going to compare to what Tobe Hooper was able to do, but it is pretty good. And there are some other very good, creepy vampire scenes. I do appreciate this movie is trying to make vampires scary. For a long time, nobody was trying to make vampires scary for like the last, 15 years? Vampires were either for teen romance or they're for action or for comedy. And vampires became popular for a while as almost like an alternative to fast zombies, where like vampires would run at you, jump at you, drink your blood, and they were just these feral monsters all running around. A lot like fast zombies, like Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead or something. There's a lot of modern vampire movies like that. I don't like that kind of vampire as much, But you do get both in this movie. You get creeping dread vampire sequences that I really like, and especially in the third act when things get much more actiony and much sillier, to be honest, you get more of the actiony, running, crazy vampire mayhem. And the movie does also stretch credibility and how much people can survive when the vampire threat gets so big in this town. Like, it almost gets too big that it doesn't feel realistic that anyone could survive. So I do think in the third act, it disappointed me a little bit, but not terribly. Now, one fear that I know a lot of people had about this movie is it going to have too much CGI? Too much reliance on CGI? I would say overall, no. I would say most of the CGI is done very well. I couldn't really tell. Invisible CGI is the best CGI, except for Barlow. And that's kind of the problem. We haven't talked about Barlow yet. They've been hiding Barlow in the marketing, which now that I've seen the movie, I don't know, I find a little bit curious because it is pretty faithful to Tobe Hooper's version, which is, I've heard, very different from the version in the book, but they're very much homaging the classic Barlow that is known in pop culture now because of Tobe Hooper. And he has some great moments, particularly when you don't see him as well, but when you see him more clearly, they clearly used a good bit of CGI for him, and I don't know why. It's totally unnecessary. He doesn't turn into a bat monster like Van Helsing or something like that. The action movie Van Helsing, not any character of Van Helsing, doesn't turn into bat monsters. I mean, he is very faithful to the 70s version, but they use CGI to like enhance him. And I just don't think it was needed, and I think it was distracting. But other than that, I thought this movie looked great. It just felt great. It's very creatively shot. There's a lot of creative shots and transitions and camera movement that I think it's well directed. And I liked the movie. It is a fun, old school, bloody vampire film. It is not great. It's not going to replace the version from the 70s, but I give it a 7 out of 10. I liked it. I like these Stephen King movies. This is another good one. That's my review, but did you watch it? What do you think? Let me know down in the comments below. I've heard a lot of negativity about this one. I don't really share it. I think it's a pretty solid movie. But if you want to hear more of my reviews, check out this playlist right down here of all my other 2024 horror reviews, or this video right here for more fun as well. Make sure to subscribe because I got a lot of fun Halloween videos on the way. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.